Is hell of Hitler.
The propaganda film even includes Stalin's imaginary victory flight to Berlin. The film was created by Mikhail Shcherely, Stalin's favorite film director. Shcherely's daughter describes how scared her father was at the first screening.
The film was running. My father was sitting at the back. Of course, everybody had their eyes glued to the screen, but my father was watching Stalin and observing his reactions. In the episode where Stalin emerges from the big plane and the whole of Berlin kneels down before him, my father saw that Stalin slowly raised his hand and wiped tears from his eyes. Only then could he breathe freely and said to himself, "I'm saved." Stalin really did like the film. After the showing, he said to my father, clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Bravo, lad, bravo." And then he said regretfully, "If only I had done it and had really gone to Berlin."
July 1945. Stalin travels to Potsdam in Germany to meet with the Allies. He sits down with Churchill and Truman.
When he arrived in Potsdam, the first question that Churchill and Truman asked was, "Did you find Hitler's body?" And he replied, "No." Maybe he believed as long as there were rumors that Hitler could still be alive somewhere, the anti-Hitler coalition would stick together.
But the Allies are too suspicious of each other, and the coalition will soon crumble. The superpowers divide the world among themselves. Stalin is now at the zenith of his power. But he is in constant fear of enemies, real or imagined. He travels on an armored train. Hundreds of miles of track are sealed off.
He had a marked instinct of self-preservation. You could spend hours talking about his security system with a special train and armored vehicles. He had thought of everything. That's why no one stood a chance of toppling him.
He was distrustful his whole life long. And the longer he was in power, the more power he had, the more distrustful he became. He thought they wanted to take away his power.
Stalin retreats to the seclusion of his dacha outside Moscow. He becomes even more isolated and withdrawn. Stalin's daughter Svetlana is no longer close to him.
I was his favorite, but also because I was good at school. Until I was 16, I didn't cause him any trouble at all.
But when she grew up, she started causing nothing but trouble. She didn't listen to him. She got divorced, and he never saw some of his grandchildren.
His son Vasily failed at school, but Stalin made him the youngest general in the Soviet military.
Well, he drank. He drank. It's bitter to speak about it. It was his ruin.
Vasily was constantly afraid of Father. He was so afraid of Father that he literally shook in his boots.
When we were sitting together, he was really quite drunk, and he poured himself another one, and I said to him, "Vasya, that's enough. Stop." Then he drew his pistol, which he always carried with him, and said, "I have only two ways out. The pistol is one, and the bottle is the other. Because I only survive as long as my father is alive.
On his 70th birthday, Stalin makes a rare public appearance. There is a celebration at the Bolshoi Theater.
Stalin took to the stage first. Honestly, believe me, the auditorium was raging. There was hysterical screaming. Everyone was overcome, jubilant. Choruses, dear father, dear father, like that.
Дорогой, любимый отец, дорогой, любимый отец.
This was precisely the time when Stalin was adored, worshipped like a god. And that's precisely what was instilled into the children, too. And my childhood began with this idea, and ended with this idea.
Stalin had ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist for almost 30 years, and transformed a nation of peasants into a superpower. But a new generation of leaders would have to shape the world and the Cold War ahead.
After the bombing in Hiroshima, Stalin sent scientists to study the effects of the atomic bombs. And he concluded, and this is a typical, perfect Stalin calculation, he concluded that the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union was the equivalent of something like 4 atomic bombs. And as a result of that calculation, he deduced that the Soviet Union could survive a first strike from the United States.
In 1949, Russia is a nuclear power and one of 2 superpowers. Stalin will test American strength at every opportunity. But at home, his paranoia continues to grow. Stalin sees himself surrounded by enemies and trusts no one.
His whole life, Stalin was waging some kind of campaign. First, he fought the kulaks, or the Trotskyists, or the supporters of Synoev, and then some other group of so-called enemies. That means there was always one group in the foreground that had to be destroyed. And so these people were arrested. After the war, there was a new campaign, this time against the Jews.
Towards the end of 1952, Stalin starts rumors that Jewish doctors in the Kremlin are conspiring to assassinate the leadership of the country. Stalin is afraid of his own doctors.
He had the flu. The doctor is called from the Kremlin clinic, as usual. He duly examines him, prescribes medicine, which he has with him, and leaves it there. Then Stalin calls one of the staff whom he knows and sends him to a pharmacist outside Moscow to buy the same medicine. The ones the doctor has left, he just throws away.
Stalin's last purge targets intellectuals, professors, artists, writers. Russia's elite, hauled off to the Gulag by the thousands. They are Stalin's last victims.
Stalin was not scared of his enemies outside. What he really dreaded were those on the inside. Stalin always felt threatened only by his own people, which he deeply despised.
In the madness of his last year, Stalin plots the use of the atomic bomb and the occupation of all of Europe. He also plans yet again for the murder of his closest advisors.
If Stalin had lived any longer, Molotov, Mikoyan, Voroshilov, and probably also Beria would have been the first to be arrested and liquidated. There were very clear indications for this to happen. And then it would have been someone else's turn. For Stalin was preparing an extensive purge.
But on the 2nd of March, 1953, alone in his dacha, Stalin suffers a stroke. 3 days later, he is dead. When he died, the people that he had oppressed and tortured are, amazingly, moved to tears.
Yes, for me that was the day almost of despair. I thought now things are going to get worse.
So many close relatives. I lost many because of him. I don't know why. There's something I can't explain to this day. But I cried too. Yes, I wept.
Stalin is, to my mind, the titanic figure of the 20th century. All the power of that Russian state and that Russian history was concentrated in one man. He knew how to take a peasant who was born without shoes and make him into a general. Wouldn't you love this man who was capable of doing that? Many alive today saw it, witnessed it, felt it. And if 20 million people died, well, what are you going to do?
In the Gulag, there is no mourning.
That day, I walked through the camp and thanked all the gods for Stalin's death. It was a secret joy, because it would have been dangerous to show it in public.
He was the devil incarnate. The devil incarnate.
Soon after his death, Stalin's son Vasily is thrown out of the army and spends the rest of his life in jail. His daughter, Svetlana, leaves the country, a refugee. And just 3 years later, Stalin's body is removed in the dead of night from the Lenin mausoleum. Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev, denounces Stalin as a criminal. Then, slowly, the myth of Stalin also dies. In this earlier propaganda film of the October Revolution, Stalin stands next to Lenin. Now the truth has been restored. Stalin is no longer part of the picture. It is known as de-Stalinization. Stalin, the man of steel. His monuments once loomed over every village. Now they gather dust in junk rooms. And yet, other memories linger. Even today, there is an enigmatic affection for the man.
Take a look at Russia today. Who is the hero? The hero is Stalin. Even Democrats in Russia would tell you, sure, Stalin had tens of millions of people killed, but he turned Russia into a superpower.
His victims lie here, in the Russian soil, in Siberian soil. Priests, soldiers, and farmers. The innocent victims